These files were never meant to be public, but someone reopened them. This is the Dark Bureau. In a brightly lit hall, another government defence contract is unveiled, its scale both staggering and familiar. Billions change hands in a ritualised display as generals and executives line up, flashes popping, their handshake immortalised for the record. The message, delivered in careful, authoritative tones, frames military procurement as an engine for security and innovation. This is the public face of global defence acquisition, ceremonial, strong, and outwardly transparent. But beneath the cascade of applause, routine hides a labyrinth. The winner, time and again, is rarely who the public sees. In reality, the apparent contestant is often little more than an avatar for interests layered behind corporate veils, legal fictions, and carefully orchestrated proxies. What appears routine from the outside, a nation refitting its defences with the latest missile shields, communications arrays, cyber defences, quickly becomes murky when anyone tries to follow the documentation. Procurement, built on declarations of openness and competition, instead sustains an architecture where ownership, influence, and true decision-making flow through a global array of shell entities, legal intermediaries, and plausible deniability. The paperwork runs from glass towers in Washington to brass-lettered offices in Frankfurt and anonymous PO boxes in the Channel Islands or Cyprus. The official path splits almost immediately, winding through interlocking companies and advisory consultancies, each bend magnifying opacity. The impact is not local. It is a worldwide marketplace where billions drift quietly, their effects felt in reshaped military doctrines and fortunes amassed far from any battlefield. For decades, the public threat in defence spending was presumed to be overspending or bureaucratic waste. Traditional audits worried over ballooning costs or broken delivery schedules. But as independent watchdogs, international agencies and specialised journalists have begun to link disparate data, a deeper reality emerges. The deliberate capture of procurement decision-making by interests concealed behind proxies. Each intermediary is not simply an administrative convenience. Instead, they represent strategic layers of distance, protecting the true beneficiaries and re-engineering security priorities from the inside out. Where contracts once favoured technical merit, cost savings, or direct reliability, now they map onto webs of favours, future guarantees, and back-channel influence. As contracts expand into the multi-billion-dollar range, the boundary between legitimate state interest and the pursuit of private profit blurs so thoroughly that neither parliamentarians nor generals can be sure whose priorities prevail. What does success in a defence contract competition actually require? The technology, the capability, the price, the formal metrics become secondary. The process transforms into a contest of engineered influence. Brokers ensure advantageous requirements are baked in before the competition is publicly announced. Strategic silence replaces open competition, so that even well-informed officials struggle to see who really holds power. Procurement process appears to reward merit, but behind the scenes, it is calibrated to favour those with access to the bidder's playbook, those who have shaped that playbook themselves. This is the story that follows the money, not just across borders, but through the scaffolding of shell company registrations, proxy shareholders, and local partners with no physical offices. The process is invisible not just by design, but by the intricate normalcy of modern finance and law. Shell companies proliferate at the pressure points. Registered on paper in the Caribbean, the Gulf, or lesser-known European havens, these entities materialise just in time to meet local requirements. Official contract awardees appear domestic, but deeper into the documentation. Appendices, annexes, footnoted sub-bidders. The real identities are refracted and filtered again and again. Contracting authorities, bound by public standards, interview the ostensible bidders, when in fact, Every principal decision is funneled to lawyers and agents far from the negotiation table. Intermediaries thrive in this environment as confidentiality, bank secrecy, and legal privilege become both shield and sword. Oversight is nominal, diffused through organisations who themselves profit from maintaining just enough deniability. Overlaying this machinery is a complex institutional system. In Washington, Brussels, London and Dubai, elite lobbying firms wield ghost-written white papers, memos and suggested laws, drafted in reality by the same suppliers hoping to tilt the process. Policy is not merely influenced, it is scripted and choreographed, with think tanks serving as rehearsal spaces rather than neutral arbiters. Aides to ministers become conduits for technical briefings that preemptively frame procurement priorities. Closed-door summits, often outside the jurisdiction of stricter regulatory agencies, present research and feasibility analysis that just happens to match a specific bidder's unique strengths. By the time an oversight committee reviews options, key choices are foreclosed. The official vote is little more than stage-managed confirmation. The structure is self-reinforcing. Lawyers, consultants, and local agents understand that the more complex the arrangement, the less likely a single person can track conflicts of interest or unnecessary cost inflation. Incentives pile up all around. Defence ministries find themselves rewarded for long-term partnerships, which in effect cement an incumbent's position. Politicians tally up jobs and new local facilities, and brokers quietly profit from each handshake agreement. Information asymmetry grows. Only those at the centre have the clarity to profit or intervene. Everyone else is left with fragments, or sometimes nothing at all. Nowhere is this machinery clearer than in the case studies that line regulatory archives. One now classic scenario: a Middle Eastern Air Force launches a formal tender for a surveillance technology upgrade. 3 firms submit bids: a plausible domestic partner, a widely known Western supplier, and a new entrant registered in a tax-friendly offshore haven. Investigative diligence by independent auditors discovers that the new competitor is owned by a chain of custody and legal veils by the same Western suppliers holding group. The optics of competition are manufactured. Journalists, public accountants, even parliamentary inquiry are initially fooled. What's at stake is more than the sale. The contract's terms lock the client nation into proprietary software and training, defining operational doctrine and dependency for the next 15 years. The procurement is not just a transaction, but a form of strategic capture. A similar pattern emerges in Western Europe as a high-profile investigation in Brussels reveals. A series of NATO procurement contracts, supposedly split between rival manufacturing groups, are shown to trace back through layer upon layer of trust funds, shell foundations, and nominee directors, all roads ultimately leading to 2 master holding companies domiciled in Luxembourg and Delaware. Public hearings erupt with calls for accountability, but legal reviews hold firm. No explicit laws are violated. Instead, institutions are caught in the gap between what the law formally allows and what the public expects from ethical procurement. Institutional reform stalls, trapped by the inertia of systems designed to obfuscate rather than to clarify. This is a structural issue, not an isolated failure. What perpetuates the system is the convergence of legal ambiguity, financial complexity, and administrative fragmentation. Lawmakers attempt reforms, lengthening compliance forms, adding new reporting requirements, establishing public registries. Still, with each new transparency initiative, the system adapts. Shell companies become even more transient, designed to dissolve after a single transaction, or shift jurisdiction at the first hint of inquiry. Intermediaries become contractually embedded as authorised agents, further fracturing responsibility. Governments tolerate these games as long as politically valuable supply chains remain apparently intact. The result? An ever-evolving feedback loop where oversight and evasion chase one another through increasingly arcane channels. The investigative response is global. Regulatory authorities from New York to London to Doha assemble cross-border teams, leveraging leaks, whistleblower testimonies, and algorithmic anomaly detection. Yet for every structure stripped of opacity, new approaches materialize. Attorney-client privilege, banking secrecy, and the complex international network of compliance consultancies protect not only the financial details, but the identity of true beneficiaries. High-profile document leaks, such as multi-country procurement records exposed in media collaborations, magnify public attention but rarely result in fundamental change. The system, hardened by decades of adaptation, absorbs criticism as a cost of doing business. For example, in a single reporting period, the OECD documents $113 billion in NATO procurement routed through 37 shell companies, each legally distinct, none with open operational histories. In the United States, nearly $14 billion in annual military electronics spending moves through intermediaries with unclear ownership, illustrating how opacity is not a marginal risk, but a defining trait of modern military spending. The network is transnational. Major procurement runs through London or Brussels, with ultimate beneficial ownership split among parties in the Gulf, the Caribbean, and Central Europe. Banks, law firms, and trusts shuffling the lines faster than any oversight authority can trace them. A transformative moment arrives in 2022. Regulatory agencies in Europe and the United States receive a tranche of internal arbitration correspondences linking defence procurement specifications to confidential lobbying memos created by the industry's largest players. Investigators compare procurement documents from 3 major European ministries to those memos and find passages copied verbatim. Proof that public policy has been ghostwritten by contractors. Parliamentary committees must now confront the reality that not only have legal and institutional expectations been violated, but the very standards by which nations outfit their militaries are shaped by the market's largest, most connected actors. The scandal commands global headlines. Major defence companies face suspensions, governments promise reforms, and intergovernmental watchdogs announce joint task forces. But institutional inertia is strong. While formal suspensions are declared and boardroom shuffles occur, the underlying architecture changes little. Major firms rebrand, law firms launch new consultancies, and the networks reassemble under slightly different nomenclature. Whistleblowers attempting to expose the depth of malfeasance are bound by aggressive non-disclosure agreements, face coordinated legal retaliation, or are sidelined in protracted arbitration. The media moves on as headline attention wanes, but investigators dig deeper, mapping a system whose resilience seems to grow under scrutiny. Attempts at reform, ultimate ownership registries, curtailed use of intermediaries, strengthened international anti-corruption statutes are announced with solemnity and then blunted as new legal instruments and corporate forms emerge almost instantly to replace those ostensibly neutralised. Consequences radiate outward in ways that statistics alone cannot capture. On an institutional level, each captured procurement weakens the feedback loop between threat assessment and resource allocation. Systems bought to fit business cycles rather than real operational need. Modernisation plans are derailed, weapons are delivered late or misaligned with actual defence doctrine, and staff are trained for dependencies rather than true strategic flexibility. Strategic drift accumulates. Entire national doctrine becomes warped as private profit motives override the careful balancing of threats and long-term security interests. The buried cost is public trust. Democratic expectations of transparency and public interest crumble as cycles of exposure and reform fail to make lasting change. Academic research now frames the defence procurement process as a perpetual race between oversight and evasion. Each attempt at greater accountability quickly meets new legal innovations or artful regulatory arbitrage. Law professors, retired procurement officials, and policy analysts describe the status quo as a contest between the machinery of secrecy and the machinery of governance. One where the public, nominally the client, is more spectator than participant. Meanwhile, the cost is not only budgetary but civil-military. Service members find themselves operating systems whose flaws stem from process, not from battlefield necessity, while national doctrine contracts to fit the interests of large holding firms and those advising them behind the curtain. There are moments of progress. Some countries publish registries of ultimate beneficial owners, establishing minimum standards for contractor transparency. Pilot programs test AI-driven bid analysis to flag recurring shell company behaviour. International institutions initiate joint procurement audits. Yet these reforms, while valuable, only highlight the deeply adaptive nature of the procurement ecosystem. The fundamental lesson is both disturbing and vital. National security, intended to be a realm of public trust and public stewardship, has become in key respects a privatised market, its drivers increasingly hidden from democratic oversight. Money swirls quietly in this system, but its impacts on budgets, strategy, and ultimately on soldiers and citizens are loud, lasting, and hard to reverse. The race continues. New techniques of obfuscation race ahead of oversight. Behind every contract announcement, behind every handshake on camera, lies a story increasingly engineered for opacity. The most profound risk is not what is simply hidden, but that boundaries between public responsibility and private profit fade until they are indistinguishable. What is billed as a contest of weapons or capability is all too often a contest between transparent governance and the relentless ingenuity of those who benefit from operating in the dark. Already, the next round of negotiations is beginning elsewhere, sharper, more sophisticated, and more complex than the one before.